My husband vanished without a trace 2 years ago. The police gave up. I never did. Last week, I finally found him. But he wasn't kidnapped, wasn't hurt, and wasn't dead. He was living a completely different life, just 3 towns over, and what I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about love. If you've ever wondered how well you really know the person sleeping next to you every night, you need to hear this story. Make sure you're subscribed because this gets darker than you could ever imagine. My name is Rachel, and 2 years ago, I had what I thought was the perfect marriage. Tom and I had been together for 8 years, married for 6 of them. We lived in a quiet little town where everybody knew everybody, and Tom worked as an accountant at the local firm downtown. He wasn't the most exciting man in the world, but he was steady, reliable, and kind. Or at least, that's what I believed. Our life had a comfortable routine. Every morning, I'd make coffee while he got ready for work. We'd sit at our small kitchen table, him reading the news on his phone while I planned my day. I worked part-time at the library, and our evenings were simple. Dinner together, maybe a movie, early to bed. It wasn't passionate or thrilling, but it felt safe. It felt like home. Tuesday, March 15th, started like any other day. I remember it so clearly because it was the last normal day of my life. Tom kissed me goodbye at 7:30, just like always. He said he'd pick up groceries on his way home and asked if I wanted anything special for dinner. I told him to surprise me. Those were the last words we ever spoke to each other. When 7 o'clock came and went that evening, I wasn't worried. Tom sometimes worked late during tax season. By 8, I started calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. By 9, I was calling his office, but nobody answered. By 10, I was in full panic mode, calling hospitals and driving around town looking for his car. I found his car the next morning. The police found it, actually, parked at the train station on the edge of town. The doors were unlocked, his keys were on the driver's seat, and his wallet was in the glove compartment with all his credit cards and $200 in cash still inside. His phone was there too, completely dead. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing broken. It was like he had just gotten out and walked away. The police treated it seriously at first. Detective Martinez was assigned to the case, and she seemed genuinely concerned. They interviewed everyone Tom worked with, all our neighbors, even distant relatives we barely spoke to. Nobody had seen anything unusual. Nobody knew where he might have gone or why. Tom didn't have any enemies, wasn't in debt, wasn't having an affair as far as anyone knew. He was just gone. I hired a private investigator with money from our savings account. His name was Frank, and he had this weathered face that made him look like he'd seen everything twice. Frank dug deeper than the police ever did. He traced Tom's phone records, his internet history, his credit card statements going back months. And that's when we found the first strange thing. Starting about 4 months before Tom disappeared, there were cash withdrawals from our joint account. Nothing huge, just $50 or $100 here and there, but they added up to almost $3,000 over time. I had never noticed because Tom handled most of our finances, and the amounts were small enough to get lost in our regular expenses. Frank said it looked like someone building up a cash reserve, preparing for something. But preparing for what? And why would Tom need to hide money from me? We shared everything. I thought we shared everything. The private investigator worked the case for 6 months before he had to tell me what I didn't want to hear. There were no more leads to follow. Tom had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed, and unless something new turned up, there was nothing more Frank could do. The police had already moved on to other cases. Tom's file was still open, technically, but Detective Martinez admitted they weren't actively working on it anymore. People in town started looking at me differently after the first year. I could see it in their eyes. this mixture of pity and suspicion. Some thought I was a grieving widow deserving of sympathy. Others whispered that maybe I knew more than I was letting on. A few even suggested that Tom had run away from me specifically, that maybe I wasn't the perfect wife I appeared to be. I threw myself into finding him with an intensity that scared people. I created social media pages dedicated to Tom's disappearance, posted flyers in every town within a 100-mile radius, and contacted every missing persons organization I could find online. I appeared on local news programs and even got featured on a regional missing persons website. The community rallied around me at first, organizing search parties and fundraisers, but after a year passed with no leads, the support slowly faded away. My obsession with finding Tom cost me my job at the library. I was calling in sick too often to follow up on leads, or leaving early to drive to some town where someone thought they might have seen him. My supervisor was patient for a while, but eventually she had to let me go. My friends tried to be supportive, but I could see them getting uncomfortable with my refusal to accept that Tom might be dead. The legal battles were almost as exhausting as the searching. I couldn't access Tom's retirement accounts or life insurance without a death certificate, but I couldn't get a death certificate without a body or proof that he was actually dead. I was stuck in this horrible limbo, unable to move forward, but unwilling to give up. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Roberts about 18 months after Tom disappeared. She was kind but direct, and she kept pushing me to consider the possibility that Tom might never come back, that I needed to start rebuilding my life. I resented her suggestions at first. How could I rebuild when I didn't even know what had happened to my husband? How could I move on when there might still be hope? But slowly, painfully, I started to accept that maybe Tom was gone forever. Maybe he'd been murdered and his body would never be found. Maybe he'd had some kind of mental breakdown and wandered off to die alone somewhere. Maybe he'd been kidnapped and taken so far away that I'd never find him. The not knowing was killing me, but I was starting to realize that the not knowing might be all I'd ever have. That's why what happened 3 weeks ago was so completely shocking. I was scrolling through Facebook late at night, something I'd gotten into the habit of doing when I couldn't sleep. Facebook has this feature where it suggests people you might know based on mutual friends or location, or who knows what algorithm they use. Usually I ignored these suggestions, but one face caught my eye and made my heart stop. It was Tom, older looking, with a beard he'd never had when we were married, but definitely Tom. The profile name said Michael Stevens, and he was listed as living in Riverside, about 3 hours away from our town. The profile picture showed him smiling at some kind of outdoor event, wearing a baseball cap I'd never seen before. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely click on his profile. Most of it was private, but I could see enough. He worked at a marketing company in Riverside. He had posted pictures of local restaurants, a hiking trail, what looked like a work Christmas party. The most recent post was from just 2 days earlier. Tom was alive. He was healthy. He was living a normal life just 3 hours away from me, under a different name. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I kept refreshing his profile, looking at every visible photo, trying to understand what I was seeing. This wasn't a man with amnesia or a head injury. This wasn't someone who had been kidnapped and brainwashed. This was my husband, clearly in full possession of his faculties, living what appeared to be a completely normal life under a false identity. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. All this time I'd been grieving for him, searching for him, bankrupting myself trying to find him, and he'd been living comfortably 3 hours away, probably reading about his own missing person case online and doing nothing to let me know he was okay. I spent the next week learning everything I could about Michael Stevens. I created fake social media accounts to follow him and his friends. I found his address through a reverse phone lookup service. I learned that he worked at a small marketing firm downtown, lived in a one-bedroom apartment, and seemed to have a small circle of work friends he'd grab drinks with on weekends. I also discovered that Michael Stevens had only existed for about 2 years. There were no records of him before that, no college photos or childhood friends or family connections. It was like he'd appeared out of nowhere right around the time Tom disappeared, which was obviously because Michael Stevens was Tom. The planning that must have gone into this was incredible. Creating a false identity isn't easy, especially one that would pass employment background checks. Tom had clearly been preparing for this for months, maybe longer. Those cash withdrawals Frank had found were probably just the tip of the iceberg. Tom had been planning to abandon his entire life, including me, I knew I had to confront him, but I wasn't sure how. Part of me wanted to call the police and report that I'd found him, but what crime had he actually committed? It's not illegal to abandon your life and start over, even if it destroys the people you leave behind. I thought about hiring Frank again, but I realized I didn't need an investigator anymore. I knew where Tom was. I just needed to decide what to do about it. Finally, I decided to drive to Riverside and confront him myself. I needed to look him in the eye and ask him why. I needed to hear him explain how he could do this to me, to us, to our life together. Maybe there was some explanation that would make sense of it all. Maybe he'd been in some kind of trouble I didn't know about and had to disappear to protect me. Maybe there was still some way to fix this. The 3-hour drive to Riverside was the longest of my life. I practiced what I would say to him, imagined every possible explanation he might give me, tried to prepare myself for any reaction. Would he be happy to see me? Guilty? Angry that I'd found him? I honestly didn't know which would be worse. I parked across the street from his marketing company and waited. I felt like some kind of stalker, sitting in my car watching the entrance to his building, but I needed to see him before he saw me. I needed that moment to prepare myself for the reality of seeing my supposedly dead husband walking around healthy and alive. He came out at 5:15 with a woman I recognized from his social media posts. They were laughing about something, and he looked so relaxed, so comfortable in his new life. He looked happier than I remembered him being in months before he disappeared. The woman said goodbye and walked to her car, and Tom headed toward his own vehicle. I got out of my car and called his name, not Michael, but Tom, his real name. The look on his face when he turned around wasn't relief or joy or even surprise. It was pure terror. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, which I guess in a way he had. For just a moment, he froze completely, like a deer caught in headlights. "How did you find me?" Those were the first words my husband said to me after 2 years of thinking he might be dead. Not, "Rachel, thank God you're okay." Not, "I've missed you so much." Not even, "I can explain everything." Just, "How did you find me?" Like I was some kind of threat he needed to neutralize. I told him about Facebook suggesting his profile, about recognizing his face despite the beard and the fake name. He closed his eyes and cursed under his breath, like he was angry at himself for some security mistake that had exposed him. "Tom, what the hell's going on?" I asked him. "I thought you were dead. I've been looking for you for 2 years. The police, the private investigator, the search parties. Do you have any idea what I've been through?" He looked around nervously, like he was worried someone might overhear us. "We can't talk here," he said. "Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street in an hour, the one with the blue awning." "No," I said. "We're talking now, right here. You owe me that much." And that's when he told me the truth. Standing in a parking lot in a town 3 hours from our home, my husband looked me in the eye and told me that he'd left me intentionally. that he'd been planning it for over a year, that he'd felt trapped in our marriage, suffocated by our routine, desperate to start over somewhere else as someone else. "I tried to make it work," he said. "I really did. But I felt like I was dying inside, living that same life day after day. I couldn't breathe, Rachel. I had to get out." I asked him why he couldn't have just asked for a divorce like a normal person, why he had to fake his own disappearance and let me think he was dead. "Because you would have tried to talk me out of it," he said. "You would have wanted to try counseling or take a vacation or do something to fix it. And I knew it couldn't be fixed. I knew the only way I could be happy was to start completely over, and I couldn't do that with you trying to find me and bring me back." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He had deliberately chosen the most painful possible way to end our marriage because it was more convenient for him. He'd let me grieve for him, let me spend our savings trying to find him, let me destroy my life searching for someone who never wanted to be found. I asked him if he loved me at all, if our marriage had meant anything to him. "I did love you," he said, and there might have been genuine sadness in his voice. "I loved the person I was when we first got together. But I'm not that person anymore, and I haven't been for a long time. I needed to become someone else, and Michael is who I really am now." I begged him to come back, to give us another chance, to at least try to work things out. But he shook his head and said he was happy now, happier than he'd ever been with me. He had a new life, new friends, maybe even someone new he was interested in romantically. He didn't want to go back to being Tom, and he didn't want to be married to me. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused you," he said, "but I'm not sorry for leaving. It was the right thing for me to do." He asked me not to tell anyone I'd found him. He said he'd built a good life in Riverside and didn't want it destroyed. He promised he wouldn't disappear again if I just left him alone, but he made it clear that he would never come back to our old life. I stood there in that parking lot watching my husband walk away from me for the second time, and I realized that the Tom I'd been looking for, the Tom I'd been grieving for, really was dead. The man I'd married, who had kissed me goodbye on that Tuesday morning 2 years ago, had been planning his own murder even then. The man standing in front of me was a stranger wearing my husband's face. I drove home that night, and for the first time in 2 years, I knew exactly where my husband was and exactly why he was gone. Somehow, that knowledge was almost worse than not knowing. At least when I thought he might be dead, I could remember our marriage as something real and meaningful. Now I knew that for at least the last year we were together, maybe longer, it had all been a lie to him. I didn't report finding him to the police. What would be the point? He hadn't committed any crime except breaking my heart, and that's not illegal. I didn't tell our friends or family either. How could I explain that Tom was alive and well, but just didn't want to be married to me anymore? How could I admit that the great love story everyone had been rooting for was actually just a man so desperate to escape his life that he faked his own death? Instead, I finally did what Dr. Roberts had been urging me to do for months. I started over. I moved to a different town, got a new job, and began building a life that didn't revolve around searching for someone who didn't want to be found. It wasn't easy, and I'm still dealing with the anger and betrayal, but I'm learning to be okay on my own. Sometimes I wonder if Tom thinks about me, if he ever feels guilty about what he put me through. But mostly, I try not to think about him at all. Michael Stevens can have his new life in Riverside. I'm building my own new life, one that's based on honesty instead of lies, hope instead of deception. The hardest part is learning to trust again, learning to believe that the people I care about are who they say they are. Tom taught me that you can live with someone for 8 years, share a bed with them every night, plan a future with them, and still not really know them at all. That's a terrifying lesson, but it's also taught me to value honesty and authenticity in ways I never did before. I don't know if I'll ever get married again, but if I do, it'll be to someone who would rather work through problems with me than fake their own death to get away from me. It'll be to someone who sees our life together as something worth fighting for, not something to escape from. As for Tom or Michael or whoever he is now, I hope he's as happy as he claimed to be. I hope his new life lives up to all his expectations. But I also hope he understands that happiness built on someone else's pain isn't really happiness at all. It's just selfishness wearing a smile. This story destroyed everything I thought I knew about marriage and trust. If this opened your eyes like it did mine, smash that like button and tell me in the comments, how well do you really know your partner? Subscribe for more real stories that will make you question everything, and I'll see you in the next one.